It's impossible to think about Will Smith without also thinking about Jada Pinkett Smith. But did you know he was married before?
Will Smith wasn't defending his wife that night, and the truth shocked everyone. When Will Smith confronted Chris Rock on stage over Jada Pinkett Smith, the world saw a husband standing up for his marriage. But behind the scenes, that relationship had already been over for years. What followed wasn't just one viral moment, but deeper revelations that changed everything people thought they knew. So what was really happening in their marriage that night? And what has Jada revealed since that completely reframes the moment? Join us as we uncover what really happened to Will Smith's wife, the marriage that had already ended before the slap. For years, the press and the public had treated Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith as one of the greatest Hollywood love stories. They were held up as an example of what a lasting, successful partnership between two powerful black celebrities could look like. Magazines called them royalty. Websites put their names alongside civil rights leaders and historical couples who had shaped black culture. The message from every angle was the same. These two people had figured out something that most couples never do. What Jada confirmed in October 2023 during a sit-down interview with Hoda Kotb on NBC was that by the time most of those glowing tributes were being written, she and Will had already decided to stop trying to be a couple. In late 2016, they looked at each other and chose to separate in every way except on paper. They quietly stopped being a married couple while continuing to appear married in public. She uses a phrase in her memoir that says, "Everything you need to understand about what they chose to do." She says, "They decided to divorce without divorcing. They would keep the family together. They would not lose the friendship. They would be fully honest with each other about their separate lives, because that was the agreement they made. But they would not tell the world, because they had not yet figured out how to explain something that had no easy name." When Hoda Kotb asked her directly why they kept the separation quiet for so long, Jada said they were not ready yet. She said they were still trying to work out, between the two of them, how to exist as partners in a new way, and that they had not figured out how to present that to others. So they said nothing. For 7 years, they appeared together at events. They were photographed together. They talked about their family. And the whole time, they were living what Jada calls completely separate lives. The reason the marriage reached that point is something she also speaks about openly, and it is not a dramatic, scandalous explanation. She says that by 2016, they were both simply exhausted from trying. She says they had both been holding on to a picture in their minds of what a happily married couple was supposed to look like, and that their two pictures did not match. They had gotten into patterns typical of young people because they had gotten together at a very young age, and those patterns had calcified over time until neither of them knew how to break out of them while still together. What she wrote in the memoir is this: "Will and I had pictures in our minds of what a happily married couple was, and our pictures did not match." Now hold that in mind as we go back further, because the story of how this marriage was always going to be complicated starts long before Will Smith entered Jada Pinkett Smith's life. It started in Baltimore, in a neighborhood where the odds were never stacked in her favor. The streets she came from and the friend she lost. Most people who know Jada Pinkett Smith through her television appearances or movies know a polished, confident woman who speaks openly about personal topics and carries herself with the kind of certainty that comes from having been in the public eye for a very long time. What most people do not know is how far she had to come to get there, and what she had to survive before Hollywood ever heard her name. She grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, raised mostly by her grandmother while her mother, Adrienne, was dealing with a heroin addiction. Her father was in and out of her life and was known to be violent. The neighborhood she grew up in was shaped by drug use, poverty, and the kind of daily danger that most people only read about. She has described growing up there as living in a war zone, where everyone around her was affected by drugs in one way or another. As a teenager, she started selling drugs. She has been direct about this in interviews and in her memoir. She sold drugs in Baltimore's Cherry Hill neighborhood. Her reason for it, when she explains it now, is simple. She wanted financial independence, and the drug dealers were the ones in her neighborhood who had money and some form of stability. She was not trying to excuse it. She was explaining the logic of a young person in a specific situation, trying to find a way to take care of herself. She also attended the Baltimore School for the Arts, where she studied dance and theater, and where, in 1986, she met the person who would become one of the most important figures in her life. His name was Tupac Shakur, and he had just moved to Baltimore from New York. He was charismatic, incredibly bright, and immediately drawn to Jada. They became close almost at once. The relationship they had is one people have speculated about for decades, mostly because of the clear warmth and intensity between them. But what Jada has repeatedly and in detail confirmed is that they were never romantic. They tried to kiss once as teenagers, both pulled back immediately, and recognized that the connection between them did not work in that direction. What it was instead was one of the deepest friendships either of them ever had. He wrote poems for her. He was protective of her in a way that she had not experienced from the other men in her life. She felt genuinely seen by him. He even sent her a marriage proposal by letter from prison while he was at Rikers Island in 1995. He asked her to answer as quickly as possible because, in his words, his entire existence depended on her saying yes. She thought about it and turned him down, knowing that what he was imagining for the relationship was not something she could give him. He was released from prison and they met again. That meeting turned into an argument. She had concerns about the direction his life was going, about the people surrounding him, about the changes she was seeing in him. He accused her of having changed too much after finding success in Hollywood. She left without resolving anything between them. And then, in September 1996, Tupac Shakur was shot and killed in Las Vegas, and that unresolved argument became permanent. She has said in interviews that she felt grief and anger at the same time after he died. She was angry at him in a way she knew was not rational, because she felt like he had left her when she had been expecting him to be around for the rest of her life. She said she had always believed he would make it through whatever was happening around him. He did not. Will Smith has written in his own memoir that the depth of Jada's connection to Tupac caused him real pain in the early years of their relationship. He admitted he was jealous of the late rapper, to the point that he couldn't even be in the same room as Shakur. He described it as one of the less admirable chapters of his emotional life. That friendship with Tupac and the grief that came with losing him were a part of Jada's interior life that went with her into the marriage, along with the childhood she had survived and the path she had fought to travel to get out of Baltimore, and along with a mental health reality that she would not speak about publicly for many years afterward. So how did the girl from those Baltimore streets end up in one of the most famous marriages in Hollywood history? And what was she carrying inside that marriage that nobody knew about until she finally put it all in a book? The depression and the secret she carried for years. By the time Jada Pinkett Smith approached her 40th birthday in 2011, she was one of the most recognizable women in American entertainment. She had been in major films. She had been married to one of the biggest movie stars in the world for over a decade. She had 2 children who were growing up to become performers in their own right. From the outside, she had the kind of life that magazines photograph and call aspirational. The opening pages of her memoir describe what was actually happening inside her during that period. She wrote about a hellfire of hopelessness and depression that had been building for years without her fully recognizing it for what it was. She wrote about feeling as if she were walking toward the edge of something she could not come back from. And she wrote about devising a plan for a fatal accident on Mulholland Drive, a plan that would not look intentional, specifically because she did not want her children to know what had really happened. She described the existence of that plan as giving her a strange kind of calm, the false comfort that comes from having identified a way out. She was not at peace. She was at the edge of something very serious, keeping it entirely to herself while continuing to appear on television and show up for her family. What pulled her back was not therapy in a traditional form, though she has been in therapy. It was hearing about someone else's experience with ayahuasca, a plant-based substance with a long history of ceremonial use that has been the subject of growing research into mental health. She tried it and describes the effect as lifting a veil from her own life, giving her a relationship with herself that she had never had before. She also says the depression she was experiencing at that time was connected to multiple things at once. Her marriage was breaking down under the surface, she had undiagnosed complex trauma from her childhood, and she had a condition called PTSD that had never been properly addressed. There was also, layered on top of everything else, a medical situation that went public in a way she had not chosen, and that made her the face of a conversation she had to learn to lead with grace. In 2018, Jada shared on her talk show Red Table Talk that she had been diagnosed with alopecia areata, which is an autoimmune condition where the immune system attacks the hair follicles and causes hair loss. The first sign she noticed was finding handfuls of her own hair in her hands while showering. She described standing there shaking with fear, not knowing what was happening to her body or how far it would go. She tried corticosteroid injections in her scalp to slow the hair loss. They helped somewhat, but never fully stopped the progression. By 2021, she had decided to shave her head entirely. She described it as a decision to stop hiding the condition and start owning it, to let go of something the body had already taken away. In her memoir, she dedicated an entire chapter to alopecia, and specifically to the shame that surrounds it. She was clear that her motivation in speaking about it so publicly was not primarily about her own experience, because she said her version of the condition was relatively mild compared to what many other people live with. She was thinking about the people whose hair loss was far more severe, about the children who had been tormented by classmates over their appearance, and about the deep shame that the condition carries, especially for Black women for whom hair is so intertwined with beauty and identity. That shaved head was what Chris Rock made a joke about at the 2022 Oscars, and that joke is what led to the most talked about moment in the history of that ceremony. But before we get to the slap and everything that came after it, we need to go back to 2020, when a completely different scandal exploded, one that the world misread entirely because a crucial piece of information was still being kept private. The entanglement the world got wrong. In June 2020, an R&B singer named August Alsina gave an interview to a radio host and made a claim that quickly dominated every online conversation. He said he had been in a romantic relationship with Jada Pinkett Smith. He said the relationship had lasted for years. It was real and serious, and Will Smith had known about it and even given his approval. The internet immediately concluded that it was witnessing a celebrity affair story. A wife had cheated on her husband, the husband had somehow been kept in the dark, or had been complicit in something embarrassing, or had signed off on something no reasonable person would agree to. The storylines people reached for were those that made sense, given what they thought they knew about the Smiths, that this was a married couple, that they were together, and that a relationship outside that marriage constituted a betrayal. On July 10, 2020, Jada and Will Smith appeared together on her Facebook Watch show, Red Table Talk, and addressed the situation directly. She confirmed that the relationship with Alsina had happened. She called it an entanglement. And when Will pushed her to be more specific, she said yes, it was a relationship, absolutely. She revealed that it began when Alsina was struggling with serious health problems, and she had wanted to help him. She said she had been in a lot of pain herself at the time, feeling broken, and that she entered the relationship partly searching for something that made her feel good. She ended it after realizing that you cannot find what you are looking for outside yourself. The word entanglement became a cultural punchline within hours. People made merchandise out of it. It became shorthand for a certain kind of relationship that people do not want to fully name. And the image that stuck in most people's minds was of a wife admitting to having been involved with another man while her husband sat across from her, looking pained. But the most important piece of information was not said during that table conversation. Neither of them mentioned that they had been separated since 2016. Neither of them explained that the relationship with Alsina had occurred during a period when they were already living completely separate lives, with an explicit agreement to be fully transparent with each other about who they were spending time with. Without that context, the entanglement looked like an affair. With that context, it looks like a private decision made by two separate people who had chosen not to divorce. When Jada finally told the full story in 2023, she clarified that Will had known about the relationship with Alsina the whole time, because transparency had been the agreement they made in 2016. She also pushed back firmly against Alsina's claim that Will had given his blessing. Her position was that only she could give herself permission to be in a relationship. What Alsina had likely understood as permission was simply the reality of being involved with someone who was living separately from a spouse under an agreement of mutual freedom. She also said something else about that period that tends to get overlooked. She was in her 40s, dealing with depression, managing a marriage that had already collapsed privately, and trying to find some version of herself that was not defined entirely by the roles other people needed her to play. The relationship with Alsina was part of that search, and it did not work. She ended it. What she did not do was tell the public the full truth about her marriage during the 2020 table conversation. That part was still coming. And then, before she could find the right moment to tell it, one of the most bizarre and dramatic nights in Oscars history forced the entire conversation into a space that nobody had prepared for. The night of the slap and what was really happening. The 94th Academy Awards took place on March 27, 2022. Will Smith was nominated for Best Actor for his performance as Richard Williams, the father of tennis legends Serena and Venus Williams, in the biographical film King Richard. It was the kind of nomination that represented the full arc of his career, from comedy to drama, from Fresh Prince to Oscar contender. Jada Pinkett Smith was in the audience beside him. Her shaved head was visible. She had been living openly with alopecia for years at that point, having decided to own the condition rather than hide it. She had spoken about it publicly. She had positioned herself as someone who was determined to reduce the shame that surrounds hair loss, especially for other women who were dealing with it far more severely than she was. Chris Rock came to the stage to present the Best Documentary Feature Award. He looked at Jada in the front row and made a joke comparing her shaved head to Demi Moore's look in the 1997 film G.I. Jane. He said he could not wait to see G.I. Jane 2. Jada has said that her initial reaction was an eye roll and that it was not entirely about the joke being aimed at her. It was more about the broader impact that jokes about alopecia have on people whose condition is far more severe than hers, including children who have experienced serious psychological distress over their hair loss. But she also said she had history with Rock around jokes at her expense at the Oscars, going back to the 2016 ceremony, and that some of that history was feeding into her reaction in the moment. Will Smith initially appeared to laugh at the joke, then something shifted in him. He walked onto the stage, crossed to where Rock was standing, and slapped him open-handed across the face. Rock said out loud that Smith had just smacked the hell out of him. Smith walked back to his seat. Then, from his seat, he shouted at Rock to keep his wife's name out of his mouth. He said it once, then said it again with explicit language. Jada has written in the memoir that she initially thought the entire thing was a planned bit between the two men. She knew how physically powerful Will was, and she could not believe Rock was still standing if Will had actually hit him with real force. She thought it had to be staged. It was only when Will started walking back to his seat, and she heard him still yelling at Rock, that she understood this was not a performance. She also writes something else that is genuinely striking. She was confused when she heard him use the word wife. She writes that they had been living separate lives and were at the Oscars as a family, not as husband and wife. And then, when she heard him yell that word from his seat, something shifted in her too. She writes that an internal thought hit her. Oh, I am his wife. It is one of the most honest moments in the whole book. She was sitting in that room as a separated person, in a quiet arrangement that the world did not know about, and the most famous word he could have used to describe her snapped her back into a role she had not been living in for 6 years. Less than half an hour after the slap, Will Smith stood at the podium accepting the Oscar for Best Actor. He cried. He talked about love. He talked about being a fierce defender of his family. He did not mention Chris Rock at all. The next day, he issued a written apology to Rock. In April, he resigned from the Academy before they could expel him. The Academy banned him from the Oscars and all Academy events for 10 years. He posted a video in July 2022 saying he had tried to reach Rock directly, but that Rock had said he was not ready to talk. Chris addressed it publicly in a March 2023 Netflix special, where he made many jokes about the incident and said he was not a victim. He and Smith have not publicly reconciled. Right after the slap, while the broadcast was still running, Chris came down to the front of the stage and tried to apologize to Jada. She has said she told him she could not talk about it in that moment, that what had happened felt connected to older tension between all of them, that went back much further than that night. So when did the full truth finally come out? And when it did come out, how did Jada Pinkett Smith manage to turn one of the messiest celebrity situations in recent memory into a book that became a bestseller? the book that changed everything and where she is now. In October 2023, Jada Pinkett Smith released a memoir called Worthy. The name itself was a signal. She had originally planned to call the book Unlovable. That was the word she had been carrying inside herself for much of her life. The feeling that she was somehow not enough, not whole, not deserving of the stability and warmth that other people seemed to access more easily. The process of writing the book changed her mind about the title, which tells you something important about what the writing itself did for her. The biggest headline from the book, the one that ran everywhere, was the confirmation of the separation. But the book contained much more than that. It contained the full account of her Baltimore childhood and her perspective on the entanglement, the slap, and what both of those things actually meant within the larger story of who she and Will Smith really are to each other. When Will Smith read the finished memoir, he emailed the New York Times to say that the book had woken him up. He wrote that when you have spent more than half your life with someone, a kind of emotional blindness develops, and you stop seeing the things they are actually experiencing. He said he had learned through the book that she had lived more on the edge than he had understood, and that she was more resilient, more clever, and more compassionate than he had given her credit for. He also sent her a personal letter through a podcast host, which read, "If I had read this book 30 years ago, I definitely would have hugged you more. I will start now." She laughed when the letter was read to her and said that was exactly why she could not divorce that man. The question of what their relationship is now is one that neither of them has been able to fully answer in any interview or statement, because the honest answer is that it does not fit inside the available categories. They are not together in the sense that most people use that word. They are not apart in the sense of being strangers or enemies. Now that you know the complete picture of what has actually been happening in this marriage for the past decade, does it change how you understood that Oscars night or any of the other moments that made so many headlines? And do you think Jada made the right decision waiting as long as she did before telling the full truth publicly? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.